What's up, my friends? I'm super excited about today. It's sci-fi, well, for me it's Sci-Fi Monday because that's when I'm recording this video. But I'm a huge nerd. I love science fiction, and I'm super excited to be talking about these stories with you guys. That's why I went a little short on the feedback this week, because I wanted to motivate you guys to actually listen to this video, because I'm going to have a ton of fun making it, and I love these stories. I think they're interesting, I think they're crazy, I think they're weird. But I just think they're fun, short stories. So, with that being said, I guess we'll do A Sound of Thunder first, then we'll do By the Waters of Babylon, and then we'll end with There Will Come Soft Rains. That was the third story I had you guys read, but didn't ask a discussion question about, and you will see why in a couple minutes. But Sound of Thunder, it's by Ray Bradbury. Let me get on my soapbox for a second here. Professors, academics, not me, let me make that clear, who study literature and take literature seriously, a lot of them don't take science fiction, horror, detective stories, fantasy stories, genre literature seriously. They don't think it's deep, they don't think it's meaningful, they don't think it's important. I totally and completely disagree with that. But where I'm going with this is, even the person who doesn't respect science fiction at all, Ray Bradbury, the guy who wrote Sound of Thunder and There Will Come Soft Rains, even they will tell you he's good. Like, in terms of writing style, his prose, if you want to use a technical term, the way he writes, the style of his stories, the language he uses, in terms of sheer literary artistic beauty, he's probably the best science fiction writer out there. If anyone's ever heard of Fahrenheit 451, that's probably his most famous work. He wrote other things like From the Dust Returned, a bunch of other stories. But Fahrenheit 451, I think HBO made a movie, TV series, something like that, out of it. But that's all him. Okay, here's the thing with The Sound of Thunder. Let's get the message, the moral of the story out of the way first. Little things have effects. Obviously, that's what he wanted you to take away from the story. That even the slightest, most insignificant thing that you don't think can have an impact on anything could have huge world-changing ramifications. For example, stepping on a butterfly millions and millions and millions of years ago in the past totally and completely messed up and changed and altered the future. That's the message of the story. Little things have consequences. Everything has consequences. But the big question is, well, how? How does stepping on a butterfly, I don't remember how many exactly years ago it was in the past, but a good, I think it was like millions and millions of years ago, stepping on a butterfly changed the future? To answer that question, we have to understand how the future changed. And I think hopefully it's pretty obvious. The future is a more brutal, violent, warlike future. And you know that in a couple ways. At the end of the story, they talk about having, there's a smell in the air, like a burning, acidic, chemical smell in the air. So chemical smell in the air. A different president was elected. When they left, this guy Keith was elected. He was the more peaceful-ish president. When they get back, Dutcher was elected, who's described as a militarist, antichrist, anti-human, anti-intellectual. A much more violent, brutal president was elected. And then there's the sign. When they left, the Time Safari Incorporated sign was written in normal, everyday English, the English we understand. When they get back, what the sign says is the same, but it's written in sort of English, and this requires a little explanation. The sort of English it's written in is basically like Middle English. Like, it's not, there's like three. For those of you guys who took my 201 class, you guys know this. There was Old English, Middle English, and Our English. This is Middle English. It's English that you can sort of understand, but hasn't evolved into our version of English. So, three ways the future's different. Chemical smell in the air, different president, the English being used is a more primitive version of English. Well, why would a more primitive version of English be used? One of the most important books ever written that nobody ever talks about is this book called Leisure, the Basis of Culture. And the idea of this book is it doesn't matter if you can write a beautiful story. It doesn't matter if you can paint a beautiful work of art. It doesn't matter if you can compose a beautiful piece of music. If your basic, low-level subsistence needs aren't met. And if you're constantly surrounded by war, if you're constantly surrounded by violence, your arts and language as part of art is not going to evolve. So more primitive language, probably because of war, chemical smell in the air, probably because of war, and a more violent militaristic president. So we know how the future is different. It's more brutal. It's more militaristic. How does stepping on a butterfly do that? Well, like I said in my feedback that I gave you, I had a theory. There's obviously no right answer. There's no right answer. My theory always used to be this, that butterfly that Eccles stepped on, obviously that butterfly would have had butterfly babies, would have had butterfly grandbabies, would have had butterfly great-great-grandbabies, great-great-great-great-great-grandbabies, so on and so forth. Would have had a whole line of butterflies. And maybe one day in the distant future, a poet, an artist, a musician, someone creative and artistic was sitting under a tree. And maybe he was supposed to see a butterfly come floating by. And maybe that image, that moment, that second of seeing that butterfly floating by was supposed to inspire him, was supposed to light something on fire in him, was supposed to just overwhelm him, where he writes a beautiful, amazing poem, composes a beautiful, amazing piece of music, paints a beautiful artwork that was supposed to somehow affect humanity, change humanity, create a movement in humanity that made humanity more kind, more gentle, more peaceful. But because Eccles stepped on that butterfly in the distant past, that butterfly never gave birth to the generations and generations of generations that would have led to that butterfly floating by. The artist never saw it. The artist never created that piece of music or that piece of art. And the world was never changed. Like I said, that's what I used to believe. But I think I told some of you guys in my feedback that I'm a big fan of like crazy, insane, alternate explanations of stories. And I once got a crazy, insane, alternate explanation of this story. And I thought it was crazy and insane. But the more I think about it, or the more I thought about it, it wasn't as crazy and insane as I thought. And after a couple years, maybe a year and a half, I started thinking, no, this is probably, I like this crazy, insane explanation better than my butterfly example. So, that last line, there was a sound of thunder. Most people read it as a gunshot going off. Most people will tell you it's Travis killing Eccles as like revenge payment for what Eccles did. Some people will tell you it's Travis killing himself because he can't handle this new world. There's another explanation for what that sound of thunder is. And like I said, I used to think this was crazy. I don't anymore. Maybe that sound of thunder is the fact that dinosaurs are still alive. Well, how does that fit in with our military explanation of everything? Well, if dinosaurs were still alive, your language would not have time to evolve. You'd need to be way more violent, way more militaristic, way more warlike, with giant dinosaurs running all over the place. You'd need to have heavier weapons. You'd need to have a more aggressive, I guess, president to keep the dinosaurs at bay. Well, okay, but how does a butterfly dying keep the dinosaurs alive? Well, if you've ever heard of the phrase the butterfly effect, some people will tell you it comes from this story. Actually, it doesn't. It comes from chaos theory. It comes from this idea that if a butterfly flaps its wings in Japan, that little gust of wind from the butterfly's wings flapping could push a storm slightly off course in the Pacific, and instead of the storm hitting where it's normally supposed to, it hits a major city and it messes up that city, all because a little butterfly gust of wind pushed it off course. Well, what killed the dinosaurs? A meteor hitting the Earth, right? Well, what if that butterfly, great grand butterfly kids, what if one of their wings was going to flap, and that little gust of wind, magnified through the atmosphere and through sciencey stuff, pushed that asteroid to where it exactly hit to wipe out the dinosaur? But if that butterfly never flapped its wings, maybe that asteroid, rather than hitting partially on land, hit directly in the water, which had some impact, had some damage, but didn't wipe out the dinosaurs. And that's why dinosaurs are still alive. Oh, the sound of thunder? One of the most famous dinosaurs, Brontosaurus, its name actually means thunder lizard. Like I said, it's kind of crazy, kind of insane, kind of out there, but over time, I like that explanation of the story. Or maybe you buy my butterfly artist story explanation. I don't know. Up to you. Alright, that's the sound of thunder for you. Now we're going to talk about By the Waters of Babylon. And let's get this out of the way first. Spoiler alert! The city of the gods is New York City. New York City that has been destroyed, annihilated, ruined, burned, just completely wrecked. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. My first question to you is, well, what happened to New York City? What exactly happened? Yes, it was destroyed. Yes, it was ruined by fire. Yes, there were chemicals and stuff. But if I ask you what caused that level of destruction, maybe your first answer is a nuclear bomb. Here's the problem with that. This story was written in 1937, which was 8 years before Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 8 years before atomic bombs were dropped. It was even written 2 years before the Manhattan Project, which was the secret government project that created the atomic bombs. So, on one hand, atomic bombs weren't a thing. The other side to that is, the guy who wrote this, Stephen St. Vincent Benet, like I said, literary one-hit wonder, he was sort of a scientist, so he knew scientific theories and what was going on in the air of science. And the idea of an atomic bomb just didn't come out of nowhere. It's not like one day in 1939 people woke up and were like, let's go make a bomb that can annihilate an entire city. People had ideas and people had theories what you could do with splitting the atom and stuff like that. So the idea of weaponizing atoms, it was there before the Manhattan Project. Did this guy get a knock on his door from like super curious government scientists being like, yo, how did you know about this? Yeah, he did. But it's not like you could, it's like I said, it's not totally clear that it's a nuclear bomb. It could be a nuclear bomb. Kind of not the point. You could do some serious damage with conventional non-nuclear weapons. Like with fire bombs and chemical weapons, you could do some damage. If you ever need proof positive of that, go look up the firebombing of Dresden and look how much, without nuclear weapons, how much damage was done to that city. Point being, either through nuclear means or conventional weapons, mankind has destroyed itself back into primitive Stone Age-ish times. Maybe not Stone Age, but primitive times. This story, there are 2 questions the author wants you to ask. I'm going to give you guys one now, and then we'll talk about the other one when we get to the end. First question is kind of what I did for the discussion question. Mankind's basically hit the cosmic reset button. two ways this goes. Mankind learns from its mistakes, and the future turns out differently, or mankind learns nothing from his mistakes and nothing from history, and you're going to go down the same destructive path. That's the first question the author wants you to ask. Which of those two do you think is going to happen? Personally, I think it's going to go down the same destructive path, because buried in this story, you find out that mankind's forgotten a lot. Mankind's forgotten science, forgotten a lot of stuff. There are three things mankind didn't forget. Three of our more negative, more baser, more non-desirable instincts or traits that I think one, two, all three of them are going to march us down the same destructive path in the story. And as we go through the story, those are the three main things I'm going to talk about. But to get us there, John, our main character, is going to become a priest. And the way you become a priest is you pick up a rock. And if you pick up a rock and you drop dead, well, screw it. You weren't meant to be a priest. But if you pick up the rock and survive, it's like the gods are showing favor on you and they have chosen you to be a priest. Let's get this out of the way first. Is it the gods deciding who gets to be a priest or not? No. Not about the gods. It's not about the person. It's all about the rock that you pick up. If you want to go with the nuclear bomb version of what happened to the world, maybe you're picking up if you pick up a radiated rock or a rock with like chemical fallout on it, you're dead. Doesn't matter who you are, you're dead. But if you pick up a rock that hasn't been touched by radiation or hasn't been touched by chemicals, congratulations, you get to be a priest. What does that show you? Mankind has totally forgotten about science. Science is not a thing in this world. But if you get to become a priest, let me read to you what happens. If you get to become a priest, you get the good piece of meat and the warm corner of the fire. If you are a priest, you get the best food, the best place to sit, and you also find out that as a priest, he was taught how to read the old books and how to make the old writings. So the priests who clearly run this society, the priests who are in charge, they get the best food, the best seat in the house, and access to education. What do we call that? Elitism. We call that, I don't know if you've ever heard of like the 1%, but like there's this idea, and it's pretty much true, that 1% of the people in this nation control like 90% of the wealth or something like that. Elitism. The upper crust, the elite and the privileged keep and they hoard the best things for themselves. They get the best food, the best place to sit, and the access to the best education. Go with me on this. If you have a relatively few amount of people hoarding the best of everything, eventually what is that going to lead to? That is going to lead to revolt, revolution, and war. Like I said, the exact same path. Has the privileged few hoarding the best of everything ever led to war in the past? Yeah, absolutely. You ever hear of the French Revolution? That's what the French Revolution was all about. The French aristocracy controlled almost all the wealth, and people were starving and living in misery. Have you ever heard the phrase, let them eat cake? That's from the French Revolution. Marie Antoinette, the Queen of France, some of her advisors were like, yo, people, there was no bread. There was no bread to feed the people with. And her response was, well, if there's no bread, just let them eat cake. She didn't get that there was no food. She was so detached from reality that she was like, oh, they're out of bread, let them eat some yodels and devil dogs to tide them over. No, they had no food because the wealthy, privileged few were hoarding everything. That's pretty much what's going on in this society. Mankind hasn't forgotten that. Mankind hasn't forgotten this natural tendency for those in charge to want to control and hold everything. The best food, the best seat by the fire, and the access to the best education. You do that long enough, it's going to lead to war, just like whatever destroyed New York City in this story. So that's the first bad thing that people haven't forgotten. Here's number 2. So John's people, the people we're following, they are the hill people. But we learn about the forest people. And the hill people don't get along with the forest people. Here's why they don't get along with the forest people. I will read it to you. We are not ignorant like the forest people. Our women spin wool on the wheel. Our priests wear a white robe. We do not eat grub from the trees. We have not forgotten the old writings. So, why do the hill people dislike the forest people? Well, for very deep and logical and well thought out reasons, like they wear different clothes, they eat different food, they use different technology, and they don't read or write the same language as them. People in our world, we don't hate other people ever for superficial reasons like that. What they look like, what they wear, what they eat, that never happens, does it? Of course it does. What mankind hasn't forgotten is this us versus them mentality. Is this, we call it I guess you can call it tribalism, that we don't like the other. The other is bad. We want, if you don't look like us, you don't act like us, you don't dress like us, you don't eat like us, we don't like that. Has there ever in the history of humanity been a war fought solely because of this us versus them mentality? Obviously there has been. Of course there has been. So elitism hasn't forgot that. Us versus them mentality hasn't forgot that. I'm going to hold off on a second to get to the third one before I wrap this all up. So in case you were wondering, this story, it probably starts out somewhere in Ohio or eastern Pennsylvania. He travels 8 days to the east to get to New York City. And he sees things that would be familiar to us, but because they're living in a post-apocalyptic nightmare, they're not familiar to us. God roads are basically just roads. He crosses over the Udison River, which is the Hudson River, but that's what happens to language. Words change over time. Town names change over time. Let's see what else. God roads with vines are basically just bridges. He gets to the city, and he sees things. He sees a statue of this guy named Ashing, but really that's Washington because the W and the TON have washed off. He sees a building called Ooptrez, which means nothing to you guys, but back when the story was written, New York City had a sub-treasury building in it, and that's what he sees, the remnants of the sub-treasury building. And here's the interesting, and he tries to open jars and cans, but he thinks they're enchanted because he doesn't have a can opener. He sees hot and running. He sees water fountain, water faucets. Doesn't know what they are. Here's the third thing humanity hasn't forgotten. I'll read it to you. I found it at last in the ruins of a great temple in the mid-city. A mighty temple it must have been, for the roof was painted like the sky at night with its stars. That much I could see, though the colors were faint and dim. For those of you playing along at home, he's in Grand Central Station. Grand Central Station used to have this beautiful nightscape. I don't know if it still does. I don't think it does. On the roof. And here's the disturbing part. I went down into great caves and tunnels. Perhaps they kept their slaves there. All he sees are tunnels. There is nothing in Grand Central Station that would even remotely lead you to believe that the tunnels, where they kept the trains, that's actually what happened, are for slaves. Nothing even remotely pushing you in that direction. What that means is the idea that for slaves, or for slavery, came totally and completely from John's mind, which very strongly suggests that his hill people practice slavery. I'm not even going to dignify it by asking whether or not there's ever been a war fought over slavery. So, 3 baser negative things that mankind forgot. Elitism, the upper crust, the people in charge, hoarding everything for themselves, totally could lead to war. The us versus them mentality totally can lead to war. That impulse to enslave and exploit other people can totally lead to war. Mankind hasn't forgotten those. And the answers to that one question, whether or not mankind is going to go down the same destructive road or has actually learned something, unfortunately, I think the answer is mankind's going to go down that same destructive road. Because there are three impulses, three things mankind hasn't forgot, all three of which could easily lead to war. So that's the first question. So the second question, so he eventually John eventually realizes that the gods weren't gods. They were people. New York City was just a city. And he comes back and he tells his dad what he learned. And his dad's not surprised. His dad knew. I guess all the priests have to go on this pilgrimage, so all the priests know. And John's like, awesome, let's go tell everybody. And his dad's like, yo, slow your roll, son. We don't have to tell everybody this. Here's the last question. And I can see two answers to it. Why doesn't John's dad want to tell everybody? There's a positive way of answering that question, and there's a negative way of answering that question. I'm going to give you both, but you'll see which way I'm leaning. Positive answer is, if you tell everybody that the gods were just people, you are undoing their entire religion. I don't know if you ever heard the phrase, the three things you don't talk about, at a barbershop or a bar or something like that. There are three things that people tend to get really, really, really worked up and touchy about. Religion, politics, and sports. There's actually a study 5-10 years ago, something like that. Out of those three, which is a person most easily willing to change? Their political affiliation, their religious affiliation, or their sports team? Believe it or not, they are most willing to change the political affiliation. Second most willing to change sports team. Religion is the thing people cling to super, 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 super hard. So, if you are telling these people your religion is wrong, that could send society crashing and spiraling down out of control. There are some truths that are so big, if you're going to tell people them, you have to met it out little by little. You can't just drop a truth bomb on them and expect everything to be okay. So maybe that's the reason John's dad doesn't want to tell everybody. Maybe they legitimately concerned about the emotional and mental well-being of their society. But here's option number 2. If you don't have a religion anymore, what don't you need? You don't need priests. And like we said, the priests run everything, and they have the best food, the cushy place by the fire, and the access to the best of everything. So do you think maybe it's possible that John's dad, who is a priest, does not want to tell everybody the truth, because that would mean all the perks and privileges and benefits of being in charge would be gone like that? That's what I tend to think, but totally up to you guys. One last thing I want to say about By the Waters of Babylon, because I actually think it's super interesting. A bunch of times in the story, he talked about knowledge, John's desire to know, John's desire to learn, knowledge. And if you go back and you read, every time they talk about knowledge, fire is used. It's talked about in terms of fire or fire symbolism. And that's actually really interesting, that fire is used as kind of a symbol for a knowledge, especially in the context of this story. Because here's the thing. I teach a myth class, and one of the myths that every culture around the world has in common is the myth of how mankind got fire. Obviously, we'll never know how mankind really discovered fire. My money is on lightning hit a tree and like, oh, fire, there you go. But every culture has a story about how man got a hold of fire. And the weird thing is, no matter what culture you go to, the god, man, animal in some cases, who brought fire to mankind, always gets punished horribly. The most famous is Prometheus in Greek mythology for giving mankind fire. He got chained to a mountain, and every night a giant eagle came down, pecked out his liver. End of the day, the eagle punches his card, is done, flies away. The dude's Prometheus's liver grows back, bird flies down again, and repeat. So why does whoever brought fire to mankind get horribly punished? Well, here's the thing with fire. Fire is super useful and super helpful. You can cook your food, warm your house, light your whatever you want to light with it, light your candle. Fire is super helpful. But fire is also super, super destructive. You can burn down your neighbor's village with it. You can do a lot of damage with fire. Any weapon worth a damn you need to forge with fire. So fire can be used for good. Fire can be used for really, really bad. What's mankind's track record when we get a hold of technology? Well, in terms of this story, we're talking about splitting the atom. Well, splitting the atom, we could unleash energy to power cities. But what's the first thing we did when we could split the atom? We wiped 2 cities off the map. So fire is a beautiful metaphor for knowledge because good things can happen with it, but also bad things. And obviously this story I don't think has the most rosy view of humanity, and well, we used fire to destroy New York City in the story. So that's By the Waters of Babylon for you. The last story, which I didn't have you guys do a discussion post about, is called There Will Come Soft Rain. It's also by Ray Bradbury. There are no characters in it. The main character, if anything, is a house. And here's why I had you guys read the story. Let's go with the assumption that in By the Waters of Babylon, it was conventional weapons, like fire bombs and poisonous gas, that destroyed New York City. So about halfway through, There Will Come Soft Rains. The house reads a bedtime poem, because the house is on automatic program. It just does everything, even though nobody's there. Here's the poem the house reads. If you ever played Fallout 3, Mr. Handy Robot reads this poem. There will come soft rains and the smell of the ground, and swallows circling with their shimmering sound, and frogs in the pools singing at night, and wild plum trees in tremulous white. Robins will wear their feathery fire, whistling their whims on a low fence wire. And not one will know of the war, not one will care at last when it's done. Not one would mind, neither bird nor tree, if mankind perished utterly. And spring herself, when she woke at dawn, would scarcely know that we were gone. So that poem, translated for you, is about how nature will react if mankind ever just wiped itself out. And what the poem is basically saying is nature either won't care or nature will be better off without humanity. How's nature doing in this story? There is no nature anymore. The only animal that's in the story is a dog, and that dog is definitely not chilling. That dog is rough, banged up, malnourished, irradiated. It crawls into the house and it dies. So, if the poem's telling you that nature's going to be thriving after humanity wipes itself out, well, why isn't it? Why is the only sliver of nature we get an irradiated dog? Well, it goes to the type of weapons that were used. If you think back to By the Waters of Babylon, one of the reasons I don't think it was nukes that was dropped on the city is because nature was coming back. There were pigeons there were trees growing, there was green grass growing. Nature can come back after conventional weapons, poison gas, fire. It might take a while. Nature can come back. When nukes are involved, nature's not coming back. And nukes were involved in There Will Come Soft Rains because they're actually called Hiroshima Shadows. when the nukes drop, the flash of light is so intense, it basically burns a shadow into the wall. And the story tells you that there are these shadows burned into the wall. Nature doesn't come back after nukes are dropped. Best example I can give you, I don't know if you ever heard of Chernobyl, the nuclear power plant that went up, I think it was 1987-ish in Russia. The blast zone, the actual place where the reactor went up, you can't even think about living there for 20,000 years. Completely uninhabitable. The perimeter, the places that were sort of touched by the explosion, you can't live there for 3,000 years. There are actually people who go on tours of the Chernobyl exclusion zone, it's called. You can stay in there for a minute. You have to get like suited up in like hazmat suits, and you can maybe go in there for 8 minutes, but then like you've got to go, or else like bad things are going to happen. And scientists have done some research on like animals who are like have started to live in the exclusion zone. Something not right with them. Like they're not normal animals. You got fish with like 3 eyes and stuff. Like very obviously the radiation did something. Nature don't come back after nukes. You can after conventional weapons, not after nukes. All right. Thank you guys for indulging my sci-fi nerdy side. I hope you enjoyed all of the stories that we talked about. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.